Not just reporting history, but shaping the conversations that define Africa's future. For brands, media planning, and advertisers, Channel Africa is more than just a platform. It's an opportunity with 25 compelling shows.
In time, a very good evening to you. Warm welcome. This is Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. I am Tsepiso Makwetla, broadcasting live from our headquarters here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, as we bring you 60 minutes of the very latest news from the heart of Africa to all the corners of the globe. One planet, countless stories at 60 minutes of the African perspective of the latest, greatest in terms of the voices, the views and the perspectives that matter. So we'd like to hear from you. It's Africa World Hour, your hour. Send us your thoughts on what's happening in and around your world and what's changing your perspective, the conversations that you're having wherever you are. Let's go straight to our top stories this hour. The former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert says the Israeli government's plans to move Palestinians living in Gaza into a zone in the south of the territory will be internationally interpreted as being a concentration camp. The humanitarian city to be built in the ruins of Rafah was announced by Israel's defense minister last week. Olmert has previously insisted that it will amount to ethnic cleansing and will be seen not as saving Palestinians, but literally throwing them away.
This is how the international community will understand these camps to be. They don't need me to interpret them what it is. When they are doing it, and those who are in charge of doing it are the ones that say that we should actually get rid of all the Palestinians living in Gaza and that all of them are Hamas and therefore they have no right to exist.
Ukraine's president has thanked the U.S. for its support ahead of President Donald Trump's expected announcement of more military aid. Volodymyr Zelensky made the comments after he met with President Trump at the White House and the envoy Keith Kellogg in Kiev, Earlier, Trump announced that the U.S. will send very sophisticated equipment to the Ukrainian capital, including Patriot Air Force defense missiles. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher has the details.
It's incredibly welcome news here because these Patriot missiles are crucial, Ukraine says, for its air defense. And Russia has really changed tactics over the last couple of weeks. It's sending up hundreds of attack drones every night and also ballistic missiles, I think in an attempt to overwhelm the air defences over Ukraine. And Patriot air defence missiles are the best of the best. They're also the most expensive as well. And Ukraine says they are totally vital in keeping the country safe.
Trade ministers from the European Union are meeting in Brussels to discuss relations with the US following President Donald Trump's threat to impose 30% tariffs against the bloc. The EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic says the proposed levy will practically eliminate trade between the EU and America.
Practically, it prohibits the trade. So if you're talking about 30% or 30% plus, there will be a huge impact on trade. It will be almost impossible to continue the trading as we are used in a transatlantic relationship. And if you look at the impact this would have, the transatlantic supply chains would be heavily affected on both sides of Atlantic.
And Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Governor Rashad Kassim, says the G20 is the most effective during global crises. Speaking at the G20 Finance Working Group meeting in Zimbabwe, KwaZulu-Natal, he cited the group's key role in responding to the 2009 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. The current challenges like rising debt and conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, Kassim emphasized the G20's ongoing importance. Finance ministers and central bank heads will meet later this week.
The challenge we're going to face at this meeting is really have a conversation around the table to kind of assess what exactly is the source of imbalances in the global economy. Are there real concerns that some countries are more protectionist than others? So it's really about creating an environment where we can have a constructive conversation on the trade issues.
And India's chief executive has warned against premature conclusions after the publication of a preliminary report into last month's deadly crash in Ahmedabad. Campbell Wilson said there was now greater clarity, but also additional questions. The BBC's Electra Naismith has the details.
Air India has come under heightened scrutiny since the crash that killed 270 people. But in a letter to employees, Campbell Wilson cautioned against speculation, rumour and sensational headlines. He said the report had found no mechanical or maintenance issues with the aircraft and there was no evidence of sabotage. It did highlight pilot confusion in the cockpit over the plane's fuel switches cutting off moments after takeoff. But Mr Campbell urged people to stop drawing premature conclusions. He said the investigation was far from over.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
It's 6 minutes past 9. Lots to cover today, and one of the stories we will be looking at is, you might recall this, the wrongful death in Hawaii of a U.S. citizen. So a wrongful death lawsuit to determine the civil penalty in the fatal police shooting of Lindani Myeni, South African, begins in Honolulu in the USA today. But first, let's start with this very important news. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has praised former Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari as a patriot who loved his nation. Buhari died in a London hospital on Sunday following a prolonged illness. He served as Nigerian president from 2015 to 2023 and was a first opposition leader to oust an incumbent president, Goodluck Jonathan, through the ballot box after the country returned to democratic dispensation in 1999. Buhari once led the West African nation as a military ruler himself after a coup in the 80s. Bonolo Maribe has more.
Muhammadu Buhari was born on the 17th of December 1942 in Daura in the northern western state of Katsina. He joined the Nigerian army at the tender age of 19 and rose through the ranks. Buhari took power in 1983 as a military leader where he sought to revive the Nigerian economy. He defeated Goodluck Jonathan in 2015, marking a seamless transition. Buhari's appeal laid in the anti-corruption message. However, his failure to deal with terror group Boko Haram triggered criticisms under his presidency.
I welcome the robust defense cooperation between Nigeria and South Africa and call for more support and solidarity with us in our fight against terrorism and violent extremism. We also welcome the increased collaboration against arms and drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking.
South African presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya conveyed Cyril Ramaphosa's condolences to Nigeria.
President Ramaphosa had the privilege of working closely with President Buhari on building relations between South Africa and Nigeria and sharing numerous reciprocal visits, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. These engagements were dedicated to intensifying cooperation in areas such as arts and culture, education, agriculture, trade and investment, mining, defense, immigration, and science and technology. President Buhari's leadership brought the two nations closer together, and this partnership contributed to Africa's collective growth and development.
Nigerian President Bola Tinubu says, as a mark of respect to Buhari, he has directed all national flags to fly at half-mast for 7 days. Tinubu says Buhari will be accorded honor befitting his towering contribution to the country. Buhari also sought to preach peace between Abuja and Pretoria following violence affecting the two African giants.
We have condemned in the strongest terms attacks against Nigerians and other African nationals living in South Africa, the looting of their shops and businesses and burning of their properties. We call for the strengthening and implementation of all the necessary measures to prevent the reoccurrence of such action, which threatens to undermine not only our strong bilateral relations, but also what we stand for.
President Tinubu says Buhari stood firm through the most turbulent times, leading with quiet strength, integrity, and an unshakable belief in Nigeria's potential. He further says the late statesman championed discipline in public service, confronted corruption, and placed the country above personal interest at every turn. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News.
And that brings the time to 10 minutes past 9. We continue with our top stories today, and from the passing of Nigeria's former president to the continued unseen or silent violence in Sudan, and that as the country's civil war has left a deadly legacy not only of lives lost and cities destroyed, but in the silent, lingering threat of unexploded ordnance. From Khartoum to Omdurman and beyond, schools, hospitals and homes are now littered with dangerous remnants of war. As displaced families return, they are walking into what experts describe as a minefield, a literal minefield, both literally and figuratively. So joining us now is Mohammed Sadiq Rashid, the chief of the UN Mine Action Service in Sudan, to speak to us about the scale of the threat and what work is being done to mitigate it. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Rashid.
Very good evening to you, and thank you very much for having me.
By using the terms silent and lingering, so it does suggest a certain level of, insidiousness. So it means that the being aware of the problem is one thing, but obviously, as we mentioned, the threat of those whom it will affect is far greater because they don't know what they're literally walking into.
Absolutely. The brutal aspect of this challenge is that the contamination is left behind in densely populated areas, in urban settings. And first of all, there are a lot of people living, billions of people living in the cities. And second, although in Sudan, the Mine Action Program is operational for many, many years, but the focus of the work was mainly in the rural areas. So people, very large number of people who used to live in many cities and now displaced, and many are stuck in the conflict zones, they are largely unaware of the threats that they are going to face. So that's a very worrying challenge. And then it's a fact, when a battle takes place, and normally the ammunitions that are used are not designed for urban areas, and almost all types of ammunitions leave behind, a significant percentage of unexploded ordnance. I mean, when ammunition is used, when it's fired, it's not going to detonate. It doesn't mean that it's going to be safe there. It will become more sensitive. It will be there indiscriminately everywhere. It will be, especially if you think about the urban setting. So it will be on the rooftops. It will be, stuck in the walls. It will be buried under the debris. And it will be everywhere. It will affect critical infrastructure. It will be on the roads, which is currently, lots of reports are coming in from the capital of Sudan, that there are unexploded ordnance everywhere, in the streets, in the hospitals, in the clinics, in the public service delivery areas, in the mosques. So it's quite worrying. The scale of the contamination is very high. It is not just Khartoum. Yes, Khartoum remained an epicenter of the ongoing war, but the conflict spread over many other areas. Many other, several cities, towns are affected. And so the problem is so widespread. Thousands of battle events have taken place.
So I'd imagine that as the war spreads, obviously more areas are affected and there are even more people who are displaced. So the danger then, I'd imagine, grows in scale as well.
You are absolutely right. As we speak now, every day, the problem is increasing. because, if you look at other conflicts around the world, like, for example, Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, for years, the civilians there were facing the threats of. They are still facing the threats of unexploded ordnance, the landmines, and also here, although the major problem is unexploded ordnance. But there are quite a few reports indicating the use of anti-tank mines. And in some cases, very recently, we heard about the use of anti-personnel mines as well. So this is really worrying. And a lot needs to be done to make sure the people are protected. And accidents are happening, very heartbreaking accidents. Particularly those groups which are returning population, they are at greater risk. Children are at greater risk. It's very, very difficult to control children.
And I'd imagine that because children, even if you do civic education work to say, look out for these kind of objects, do not touch them, children are children and they're curious by nature. And is it more difficult to identify these objects in a war situation or during peace? When is it easier to get a stranglehold on the problem?
Well, of course, when the war is going on, one of the key challenge the humanitarian workers are facing is the access. So going to the areas is difficult. The first thing that as mine action experts we need to undertake a rapid survey of the affected areas to identify, what kind of threat is there, what are the real boundaries of the contaminated areas, what is the priority of the area, which area, because we don't have hundreds of teams to be deployed to everywhere. There are very few teams, and we should follow the prioritization. So the survey, when there is peace, when there is, but in Sudan, actually, despite war is going on, these days, significant areas have become accessible, and the work is possible. Actually, some work is going on now, which is very minor. Is not a bigger capacity is needed to quickly address the problem.
So tell us about the work that you do and the challenges you face as UNMAS. How do you go about delivering clearance? Is it specific equipment that is needed, and do you have the enough resources to do so in so widespread an area?
Sure. Before the war, the mine action program here was, functioning well, relatively equipped. But as the war started, we lost all the technical equipment. Yeah, pretty much all the equipment, and personnel were scattered. So that was actually we restarted everything from scratch in terms of the mine action response. So it took us required us to make a lot of efforts. And then the critical challenge that we were faced was the funding challenge. Even we had confirmed funding for this year, at the beginning of this year. But then suddenly, the donors actually they decided to suspend, and they asked us to return the money. So we were actually, our program was closing on the 31st of March. We were lucky, we reached out to many other donors, and then some donors, generously supported the program, and then we managed to restart our work. So what we are doing is now, the most important thing is at this stage, which is doable, is sensitize the people as much as possible by disseminating some basic safety messages, so that when they go, when they see something, they should not, move it. If it is an item or an exploded ordnance is stuck, a rocket is stuck in the wall, they should not pull it. Things like that. we did that. So we used direct and indirect explosive hazard risk education methods. We actually disseminated a lot of radio messages using the local radios, social media, so this work is going on. This is going on. As I said earlier, the number of people who are at risk are significant. It's I think it's more than 13 million people we are talking about that they are potentially at risk of explosive hazards. So this is a large number of people, and we need really lots of efforts to make sure that they're fully aware. So we are trying to work collaboratively with the Ministry of Education, for example, to make sure that some lessons are integrated into the education system. Teachers are trained and work with other organizations, for example, vaccination campaign, for example, or food distribution, to distribute some safety messages to the people. So this is what we are doing now. But then the most important work is the actual survey and clearance work. You have to remove the hazards because normally it will be very difficult for civilians to live with that exploded ordnance. Okay. And also it's very, very difficult for the other public service delivery organizations, the hospitals, the clinics, the education institutes, to restart without their areas to be cleared first.
Mohammed Sadiq Rashid, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there with you, but much appreciated your time. Chief of the UN Mine Action Service in the Sudan. It brings the time to 22 minutes past 9.
Este é o Caleidoscópio de Canal África, com Remo Samo e João Yabalá.
O surto da cólera em Angola tem causado grande preocupação, afetando já mais de metade das províncias do país. Simultaneamente, a Agência dos Estados Unidos para o Desenvolvimento Internacional, USAID, um dos maiores doadores mundiais de assistência humanitária, decidiu não priorizar os países com maior incidência de malária. Para discutirmos as causas do alastramento da cólera em Angola e os impactos dessa decisão da USAID, convidamos o Dr. Jeremias Agostinho, médico e mestre em saúde pública, para partilhar a sua visão sobre o tema.
A doença, nesse momento, representa o maior risco de saúde pública que nós temos. Nos últimos anos, a nossa preocupação esteve sempre centrado com os casos de malária, os casos de tuberculose e também de infecção por VIH-Sida. A forma como, em pouco menos de 2 meses, os casos de cólera vêm aumentando, acaba por representar, nessa altura, um dos maiores desafios que o país tem. É expectável que, nesta fase, o número de casos venha a aumentar.
De segunda a sexta-feira, das 20 às 21 horas locais, este é o Caleidoscópio de Canal África.
Vue d'Afrique avec Joël Mouteba.
Cette peur d'un point de non-retour nucléaire suffit-elle selon vous à légitimer une telle offensive, monsieur Talazi?
Absolument pas du tout. Cela fait plus de 30 ans que l'Israël crie haut et fort sur les toits, où il veut se faire entendre que l'Iran serait à 1 an pour obtenir l'arme nucléaire. Parfois, l'Iran serait à 6 mois. Parfois, l'Iran serait à 2 semaines pour obtenir son arme nucléaire. Et curieusement, jusqu'à ce jour, il n'y a toujours aucune preuve que l'Iran a obtenu cette arme nucléaire en dépit des déclarations d'Israël et de certaines puissances parfois.
Vue d'Afrique, du lundi au vendredi de 15h à 16h, temps universel.
1 hour, 1 continent, 1 voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And just before 25 minutes past 9, just a quick one to remind you that we will be unpacking the legacy of the late former Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, later with Dr. Abdul Wasi Babatunde Moshood. For now, let's talk about a very important summit that will be underway as climate change, biodiversity loss and food insecurity intensifies across the globe. The role of sustainable agriculture has never been more urgent. At the recent 44th FAO conference in Rome, world leaders backed a new work program that puts resilience, innovation and targeted action at the heart of global food systems. Joining us now is Kaveh Zahedi, Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He leads FAO's efforts to help countries build climate-resilient, nature-positive food systems. A very good evening to you, Mr. Zahedi. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So that last sentence, quite a mouthful, and I'd imagine that that's the impact that you're going for, something that is substantive, that will be long-lasting as well.
Of course, and thank you for inviting me onto the show. The reality is that these are intertwined issues. These are intertwined challenges that countries are facing. You can't just tackle climate change on the one hand and biodiversity on another hand and food security in a different way. These are intertwined, and they need to have policy responses. They need to have interventions that are equally holistic, and that's in a way the work of the Food and Agriculture Organization, especially the work that's undertaken in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment.
And obviously we are talking about an urgent need, but there is the goal of 2030 that is inching closer and closer. No doubt we are going to miss a lot of these targets. But so far, have we seen governments, organizations, in as much as they understand the intersections, are we seeing that in the policy design, development and implementation?
I think we're seeing much more than we used to a few years ago. I mean, let me give you just a couple of examples. You mentioned at the beginning of your show that there are some big conferences that deal with climate change, that deal with biodiversity and other environmental issues. A few years back, you just wouldn't have heard discussion about the role of agriculture and sustainable agriculture to support countries in building resilience or in confronting their biodiversity challenges or indeed their broader environment challenges. Now it's really front and center when you look at what the discussions are in the climate COP, the Conference of the Parties, and there'll be another summit in Brazil later on this year. The role of sustainable agriculture is fully understood. In fact, I would go as far as saying that there's an understanding that without addressing agriculture, without building resilience in agriculture, without reducing emissions in agriculture, it's simply not possible to achieve the lofty goals that countries have set themselves, including the Paris Agreement. So yes, we see a big shift in momentum, and we see that not just at the global level, but slowly but surely translating into the national level, where we as FAO are also supporting countries to embed these opportunities for action on environment, action on climate or biodiversity through agriculture and food systems. And we're seeing that now reflected in countries' climate plans, their famous nationally determined contributions, and their adaptation plans and their biodiversity plans, ready for investment and scaling up at the national level.
And tell me, is there improvement, particularly if we're talking about shared cost arrangements, expertise and other mechanisms? You speak about the COP and some of its outcomes and commitment that are, in the near future. But these have been some of the stickler points.
There's no question that finance is going to be critical to leveraging greater ambition, greater investment. That goes without saying. And we have the what you refer to, the Baku to Belém roadmap to see how countries can raise the climate investment, the 300 billion rising all the way up to 1.3 trillion. What we have done, the analysis we have done at FAO shows that in spite of this growing climate finance, not enough of it is going towards agriculture and food system solutions. Not enough is flowing towards adaptation or building resilience in agriculture. Not enough of it is going to reducing emissions from agriculture. Maybe if you take climate finance as a whole, public and private sector, less than 5% is going to these solutions, which are frankly probably the best investments if you want to deliver on adaptation and mitigation and food security all at the same time. So I agree, in the one sense we see growing climate finance, but on the other hand, probably not enough going towards the agri-food system solutions.
So we'd have to move from understanding the foundations of these, or what the foundations of these sectors in order to be adaptive enough to create these strategies. But stable societies, that's something that we're certainly not seeing now. In fact, we're in an even more turbulent and turbulent time because of geopolitics, but also because of the impact of climate change. And either governments are not doing enough, or communities, in some cases, just don't understand the root cause of what we're going through.
I think actually farmers have a very good understanding. They can see that the climate is impacting their lives and their livelihoods. You know, one harvest that's missed because of climate-related extreme weather can undermine years of hard-won development for farmers and for food producers. And they understand it because they are on the front line. They're on the front lines of rising temperatures. You know, we may talk about the past 10 years being the 10 warmest on record. They feel it on the ground. They feel the increased frequency and intensity of droughts and floods. Again, they've been rising by many-fold over the past few years. They feel it in the shifts in the rainfall patterns that have already occurred, and of course in the changing prevalence of pests and disease. So I think farmers on the front lines understand it very well. Whether they have the tools to cope with it or not is another question, and certainly whether they have the finance to invest in building that resilience. I think that's where we need to pay a little bit more attention, including on the side of innovation that you mentioned at the beginning of the show.
Farmers is one thing, and I appreciate you raising it. The reason I'm talking about not all communities are supportive of some of the innovative or even immediate action that is taken. If we look at pollution, for instance, you still have communities, even though that they're told that, you know, this is going to be a danger to your livelihood, including food security. But if you're not in immediate danger, then you don't take the steps to remedy the situation.
Fair enough, but I think we're at the stage where we are in immediate danger, right? I mean, a third of agricultural land around the world is degraded. What does that translate to? That translates to being much more difficult for farmers to produce food for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and for the rest of us. I think that the move towards sustainability, the move towards building resilience is about the bottom line as much as it is about a sort of a global climate promise or global climate ambition. And that's exactly what we've been doing, right? We've been working hand in hand with farmers, with the agriculture sector, to build that resilience, to make, for example, the aquaculture and fisheries more resilient to a changing climate, to build more sustainable livestock systems, to look at more seeds and crops that are more adaptive, that can tolerate these fluctuations, less rain, more rain, the droughts, to use agroforestry and sustainable management of forestry. All of this really, the interventions, you can call them climate interventions, but in reality they are livelihood interventions, and that's why they're such a good investment.
And that's why you are also emphasizing the need for partnerships, because you also understand the complexity of multilateralism as well, that you need everybody to pull in the same direction. So one is not necessarily being negative, but is pointing at the fact that not everybody sings from the same hymn sheet, even if, for instance, some will balk against scientific advancement, looking for more organic solutions, for instance.
I think we have plenty of solutions, and they're really tried and tested. You know, I mentioned to you, healthy livestock is a good thing. It's also a good thing in terms of methane emissions and climate change, but it's the good thing for the farmer. It's a good thing for the livestock. Building resilience in supply chains, reducing food loss and waste. These are sort of almost win-win solutions that we have. Organic agriculture is another one. It's true with some of these solutions that there are upfront costs, and that's what I think we need to try to address, to make sure that the farmers are able to cover some of these upfront costs that bring huge dividends, both for the farmer and, of course, globally in terms of climate change itself. But it's not for a shortage of solutions. It really is the shortage of scaling these up and investing in them at the scale that's needed to match the ambition and frankly, the possibility that exists through agriculture and food system solutions.
We thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Kaveh Zahedi, Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. They've just come out of the 44th FAO conference in Rome, where the Director General there said, it may be a daunting, task, a daunting future, but that we should rather be pledging to eradicate hunger, to ensure that we don't diminish the urgency of our mission, to rather amplify it. It's 25 minutes to 10. We're going to be back in just a moment and talk about the life, the work and the times of Nigeria's former President Muhammadu Buhari.
This Mandela Month, Channel Africa invites you to walk in the footsteps of a giant. From the prison yard of Robben Island to the halls of the United Nations, Nelson Mandela's legacy reminds us that service, compassion, and justice are the building blocks of real freedom.
En cette journée Mandela, que nos actions fassent écho à son héritage.
Alionyesha dunia ya kwamba sauti moja yaweza kuhamasisha mataifa.
Mandela ensinou-nos que a liberdade não é dada, mas sim conquistada através da coragem e sacrifício.
Join us as we reflect, remember, and reignite the spirit of Madiba across the continent. This is more than a day. It's a call to action. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Nelson Mandela taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it.
We should all bear in mind that the greatest glory of living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall.
This Mandela Month, Channel Africa salutes everyday heroes. On Channel Africa, the African perspective. Catch us on Satellite Channel PAS 10. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we continue with some of the top stories on this Monday. And now we speak about Muhammadu Buhari, Nigeria's former military ruler turned elected president. He was a figure of immense influence and, in some cases, controversies. Known for his strict discipline and tough stance on corruption and security, his leadership left a deep and complex mark on the country. Today, we speak to Lagos-based political analyst Dr. Abdul Wasi Babatunde Moshood to speak about Buhari's legacy, his successes, his failures, and what his passing means for Nigeria's future. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Abdul Wasi. Let's just first start with, in your view and what you've seen, has been the dominant reaction to Buhari's passing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. I can tell you that there have been a mixed reaction since the passing of former President Muhammadu Buhari. To a lot of people, they see him as somebody who was very disciplined, very upright, full of morals, and that was down to heart and have the interests of masses at heart. And to a few others who are very critical, they see him as a dictator, somebody or some people felt he was a religious bigot. And in fact, some people even refers to him as an ethnic chauvinist. So it was a mixed reaction that indeed we lost someone of his status.
And you, as a political observer, are these labels, fair comment? Has he at some point or the other embodied behavior that speaks to these characterizations of him?
Yeah, different people have their perspective analyzing a political leader. And if you are a leader who wants to rule successfully, there are some distractions that you will not even, allow to distract you. Buhari, as a military head of state, came at a point when the political situation in Nigeria was in a comatose. the economic situation in Nigeria was in a dire strait. And it came at a point with his lieutenant, Tunde Idiagbo, where they introduced what we call war against indiscipline. And every citizen of Nigeria can attest to the fact that that singular act really put a kind of sanity in the country called Nigeria. Before the advent of Buhari in 1983, Nigeria was in a kind of situation where, of course, anything goes. But those, of course, who were political criminals, corrupt politicians, and every other persons, they were able to deal with them. You also recall that there was a law, of course, that it was criticized that he applied the law retroactively. And what was this law? That if you carry a cocaine, that you face death penalty. You see, at times when laws are made, it is not to punish offender, but to serve as a deterrence. You see, after one person was dealt with, no other person was caught carrying cocaine in Nigeria again. So he came at the point where, of course, he brought sanity. So this was, of course, the kind of impression a lot of people like myself and others who supported him when he was coming back, because he came back 30 years after he ruled as a military head of state. And he was coming to a country that when he himself got there, he said he felt he was like in a state of 30 years before now, because he even met in government was overwhelming. So, you know,
and let me jump in and talk about that overwhelming aspect of it, because, as you said, a figure who was seen as a champion of an exactor of order and discipline. And there was a great deal of hope, in fact, belief that he would bring to an end the violent attacks by Boko Haram, the terrorism that ravaged particularly the northeast of the country. But in the end, he was seen as being no match to it. Your comment on that?
Yeah, you recall that when Buhari came into office the first time, about 14 local governments in the northeast were ungovernable. But when he got there with the multinational task force that he instituted, they were able to not only to take over the 14 local government, but was able to restore some forms of sanity to the northeast. And they were able to also push the Boko Haram to the fringes during his first term. And of course, this was about the time too that the weapons that were really required to deal was coming from the west. So you attest to the fact that he was able, the kind of situation he met when he came to power, he was of course able to deal with it during his first time. But this, of course, was not to be the case during his second coming. And there were a lot of things that could account for that. One of such was that when he came during the second term, because of the fact that people realized that it was going, you know, when you want to fight corruption, corruption will fight back. And the corruption did fight back in the case in the instance of Nigeria. And what they were doing? They tried to get at his life. They wanted to kill Buhari. And he was poisoned. And the fact that even some people, even when Buhari returned from London, they said, no, it's not Buhari, it's once somebody from Sudan that was cloned. So because they were dead sure that the kind of thing they have used on him, he cannot recover.
And that's what I want to zero in. The man who finally came into the helm of power as a civilian, could he live up to the expectations of the man who was seen as a coup leader, as a strong man in the military in the 80s? Because if you recall some of the methods that he used, you speak about the discipline that he tried to instill in the streets through the police. Wole Soyinka himself even described Mr. Buhari's campaigns as sadistic.
Yeah, Buhari as a civilian president, there is no way he could rule as a military head of state. Of course, you recall the fact that even before he came into, there have been a lot of propaganda that said Buhari, he was a dictator, that said he was not a democrat. You see, when you use this kind of words against a president that is trying to wear the gown of a democrat, you see, automatically you will have affected such person's psyche. So when he came to power, he realized the fact that there was no way he could rule like a military. And let me tell you sincerely, if he wants to rule successfully, even as a democrat, you have to have some character of a military, especially in a country like Nigeria. A country where, of course, when you want to fight something, that thing will fight you back. You have to be ruthless. You have to be a democrat, yet you have to be ruthless. Because, oftentimes we make reference to Kaba. Okay, what do you make of what Trump is doing in America? We are not saying everything he's doing is fact. But what I'm telling you that when we are talking about democracy has some character of autocracy. Autocracy in the sense that there are some. That's why somebody like Plato refers to democracy as a mob rule, because he felt that popular opinion that may not be the kind of opinion that will salvage the citizenry or the country, but the Democrat wants to go into that world, follow the cloud. But a true Democrat, in my own reckoning, is that person that what is right and what he wants to do is going to serve bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. You see, in that instance, if you are sure that what he wants to do, you are sincere about it, there are times you don't listen to the distractions of your distractors. So ruling a country like Nigeria, and elsewhere in Africa, you have to be So a leader that's not only be visionary, but focused and at times employed. So Buhari, I was trying to let you know that when he came as a civilian president, there was no way he could have ruled like a military president, because initially he has been so he has been so dehumanized even before he got there. So
Speaking
there was no way he could rule like
dehumanizing. I want to talk about for President General Buhari as a man, and a man who himself was a family man, but who presided over a nation where there were incidents of, gender rights that were violated. For instance, he was quoted as saying in criticism to his first wife that, "I don't know which party my wife belongs to, but she belongs to my kitchen and my living room and the other room," a reference to, we understand, the bedroom. But was he a man who instilled gender equality to a point where all citizens felt that they were protected and they were free to partake in that democracy that you say at some point he did inculcate, irrespective of the fact that he had to, as you say, apply autocratic tendencies to get order going in the country?
You see, in my country, there is this local parlance that says, that you are not loved in the country, and you are singing, who will support you in your music. So now, this of course was somebody that we know was a die-hard disciplinarian, and the fact that he was a die-hard disciplinarian does not, by any iota of doubt, take away his humanness. You see, even the humane tendency that he had was the fact that whenever he wants to implement any policy, he always have the masses at heart. You see the so-called people that will say they respect gender. What are the ways that they treat women? You see, at times they treat women like a commodity. Even those people that say they respect gender, you see, they use women as means, as tools of advertisement. They use women as tools of entertainment, and they use women as means of. And now see somebody who, of course, a disciplinarian, a humanist, a down to heart somebody. Yeah, in his approach, he may not be diplomatic, the way he speaks, the way he talks. But when you go down to the heart of this person, you see the way he has raised his kids, with some kindness, and you will see it radiating. Of course, if Buhari was to be somebody that did not value a woman, there was no way his wife Aisha Buhari would be seen in the public. There was no way he would have interaction with party or move. You see, this is to tell you that yet people may be saying something else. I just made mention something that somebody may not be too diplomatic to be used what we call diplomatic languages, and even at the forum. Of course, he may.
So what would you
process.
say he did for the country? And I'm talking about the larger population. We're not just talking about at home, as in for women, for girl children that said that he was a man who respected equal rights. I hear you say that some people who are better at playing it through what they say, but you're saying he was a man of action. Can you point to some of his policies? Can you point to some of the things that changed that point to this under his leadership?
Yeah. You see, what you will see in Buhari administration was that, of course, we are talking about this affirmative action. We are saying that women should be given 30% of appointed positions. But you now see that even without Buhari, even other previous successive administrations have not been able to achieve that. But what you see during Buhari's time was that yet he was unable to achieve 30% given to women, but he appointed women into critical positions. During his time, he appointed women as Minister of Finance and other critical positions in the nation. And one thing you give to him was that when he appointed anybody, he didn't always intervene in the affairs, be it women or men. So you see at least substantial number of women in his cabinet. That's number one.
All right.
And number two,
we have run out of time, Dr. Abdul Wasi, but thank you so much for answering that last question. Dr. Abdul Wasi Babatunde Moshood, speaking about the life and legacy of former President Muhammadu Buhari, who just passed recently.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And two news that we mentioned earlier on, the wrongful death lawsuit to determine a civil penalty in the fatal police shooting of Lindani Myeni. It begins in Honolulu, Hawaii, in the USA today. The first order of business will be jury selection in a trial against the Honolulu City and Police Department. The civil lawsuit brought by Lindani's widow, Lindsay Myeni, alleges that the police officers acted recklessly and without justification on the night that they killed her South African-born 29-year-old husband on April 14th, 2021. Sherman Bryce Peace has this report.
The civil procedure comes after the Honolulu City Council rejected a $1.5 million settlement in the wrongful lawsuit case last year. The decision to file suit came after the Honolulu prosecuting attorney found that the two officers who shot Lindani Myeni on that fateful night in April more than 4 years ago were justified in using deadly force, and that the officers would not face charges in the case. A council vote to settle the matter last year was cancelled, leading to the civil procedure seeking financial damages after the local prosecutor, Steve Alm, determined there was no criminal liability for the police officers who killed Myeni, arguing that Myeni was the aggressor and that he suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease that might explain his behavior on the night of his death.
In this case, they acted appropriately. So the officers' actions were justified during our investigation as self-defense, defense of others, and force used in law enforcement. Finally, there was zero evidence of racism. Playing the race card here is shibai. The officers did what they're supposed to do in a tough situation. I'm sorry Mr. Myeni passed away. I think CTE is a big part of it.
Myeni attorney Jim Bickerton told SABC News last year that they believed they would prevail at a jury trial and anticipated the damages would be much higher than the initial settlement the council rejected. This from an interview with Bickerton in April 2022.
A civil lawsuit can't result in anyone going to prison, but it can do two things. The first thing, and I think probably the most important from the family's perspective, is to shine the light of truth on the situation and bring forward all the evidence and show who's being truthful and candid and honest about things and who's not, and in that process have some accountability. The second thing it does, and it's really very important, although it's a little more mundane, is that it is designed to seek compensation. And you know, the way that we look at it is Lindsay and her family and Lindani, they've already paid. So compensation is to try to put them back a little bit of what was taken.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground now!
The lawsuit argues that the officers who encountered Mieni on that fateful night did not identify themselves as police and were motivated by race.
I still believe that, and I haven't seen any reason not to. I believe that it's a subtle form of racial discrimination. I don't feel it's like, oh, here's a black man, let's shoot him. It's much more like, here's a black man, we don't need to give him the dignity of announcing ourselves. In other words, we can treat him in a lesser way than we might treat someone else. If it was someone else, they might have said, sir, freeze, we're police.
Yeah.
But because they see a black man, they say, get on the ground without further ado.
Police officers shot the former rugby player 4 times when he emerged from a vacation rental property adjacent to a Hindu temple. The civil complaint explains that it's not known whether Mieni intended to inquire about the rental or whether he mistakenly thought he was visiting the temple next door. Despite behaving and departing peacefully, the occupants of the rental frantically called police, who encountered Mieni as he was departing the property, leading to a physical altercation and his subsequent death. I'm Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York.
And we wrap with this judgment in the application by the state for clarification on the acquittal of Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotosho and his co-accused Lusanda Sulani Ezukiswa Sito has been set down for Tuesday next week. The matter was heard in the Gqeberha High Court today, located in South Africa's Eastern Cape province. The National Prosecuting Authority has taken its first step towards possibly appealing the trio's acquittal. In April this year, Judge Irma Skuman found Omotosho and his co-accused not guilty on several charges, including human trafficking and rape. Sisipo Ncome has more.
After nearly a decade of legal proceedings, the case involving Timothy Omotosho returned to court, this time for the first part of the appeal process of the state. In April, Judge Irma Skuman ruled that the state had failed to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt, pointing to poor cross-examination, a lack of corroborating evidence, and possible prosecutorial misconduct. State advocate Apla Bodlani says they are seeking clarification of the factual findings that led to the acquittal of the trio earlier this year.
Suggesting that Malady should alter the judgment. The judgment stands. Malady is not going to alter her own judgment. That procedure is simple. But in order for the state to ask Malady to reserve questions of law, the state has to know what are the factual findings that Malady made in the trial that served before her. And we are not alone in this suggestion. The essay says this is what is available to you, the state, if it is not clear to you what the factual findings are.
The defense came out strongly against the application, with defense attorney Peter Doberman calling it vague, out of time, and an abuse of the court process.
In law, a question of law under section 319 must arise on the trial, that is, from the court's actual findings of fact. It cannot be reserved on the basis of what the state wishes the court had found. The state has no right of appeal against findings of fact, and any legal question must be determined on the factual findings as recorded by the trial court. The request for clarification is therefore not only procedurally irregular and incompetent, but also misconceived in principle.
NPA spokesperson Advocate Mthunzi Mhaga says they will be bringing the matter to the Supreme Court of Appeals irregardless.
Regardless of the decision that she takes, we will take it to the highest court because we believe that she was wrong in her approach. But if the decision is to the fact that we are provided those clarifications, then well and good for us.
Judge Skuman has reserved judgment in the matter and will hand down her ruling next week, Tuesday, the 22nd of July. Sisi Bongumbe, SABC News, Gqeberha.
And that brings us to the end of Africa World Hour. Up next is Sheila Ndukumana with Hotlines. They'll be discussing TRE, which is tension and trauma releasing exercises, as per Dr. David Bacheli. From us, says good night.